Hi, welcome. Welcome to Daycare News first video. If you haven't had a chance to view the introductory video, it outlines my background and some of the issues that will be covered on this channel. Please feel free to view it. This video is the first of a set of videos reviewing the Port Moody Daycare Action Plan. The action plan is largely the same format as the plans made in other BC communities. I was asked by a local newspaper reporter what my opinion was of the Port Moody plan, and I hadn't read it, so I had to find a copy and then review it. And I actually have some fairly big concerns, which I would like to bring up. The channel motto, discussion is the basis of good decision-making, and I would love to have discussion about these issues. As written, I believe the Port Moody Action Plan and others written in the same format have the potential to result in overcapacity and closure of some daycare spaces. I'll support each of these points below in the rest of the video, but at a high level, no reference was given to the fee structure that would support the stated demand. And the target ratios, a ratio is the number of children out of every 100 children that should be in daycare. So if 20 children out of 100 are in daycare, that's a ratio of 20 out of 100. So the target ratios used to determine the number of new spaces that were recommended were not backed up. There was no assumption, description of the assumptions or precedent of those ratios. They do, however, seem to possibly correspond to the ratios that would be expected once $10 a day daycare is already in place, as they are much higher than the rates in any other provinces. And they're not quite as high as Quebec, which has an average of $8.50 per day for care. So it makes sense that that's where they came from, but it wasn't stated. And because it wasn't stated, there was no coordination of the rollout spaces with fee changes in the number of children in each area, or existing available spaces in the area. And therefore, the capital expenditures could then lead to a smaller than predicted net increase in daycare spaces. And I welcome discussion on any of the points I'm bringing up. So here I'll do a quick 2-page review of the actual action plan with just a few comments, not too much, but I'll follow with analysis afterwards. The action plan is written as a 10-year demand for daycare, forecasting the need for 1,074 new licensed spaces in Port Moody. It notes that city planning is actually predicting a slight decrease in the number of children, but yet the plan is recommending a doubling of the current daycare spaces. It attributes the high need for more spaces to unmet demand, which it says is demonstrated by waiting list. Now that demand isn't really quantified, and the ratios aren't really quantified, but I'll get to that later. And the plan does give detailed statistics on vulnerability, household income, single parents, things like that. But those numbers are never referenced when coming up with they're never drawn back to the ratios that they come up with. So it's kind of like two separate pieces of information. It does note that families who have childcare arrangements that they're not happy with cannot change their childcare arrangements because of cost alternatives. So for those kids who are maybe being taken care of by extended family, they can't afford to put them in daycare. And operators are saying that they can't reduce the cost of daycare because of the cost of staffing and rent, et cetera. So my concern is that analysis of demand can only ever be done in relation to price. You can think intuitively, if daycare is $100 a month, you'll have a lot more kids wanting daycare than if it's $5,000 per month. So you can't state a static demand model that doesn't reference a fee structure. In order to validate my concerns, I contacted Gordon Cleveland, who is a member of the expert panel on the early learning and childcare data and research. He advises the federal government on policy. And I chose him because his studies were actually quoted in the Port Moody Action Plan. There, his confirmation is shown there, his email, or the beginning of his email anyway, starts by confirming that wait lists are not indicators for demand. He includes some metrics, which is what I would have expected in the Port Moody plan, where he's saying at $8.50 per day, then you can expect this amount. So I didn't see that in the Port Moody plan. That's my concern. But at the bottom, I highlighted his point that Somebody needs to be planning childcare expansion based on what is going to happen to fees over time. If they are not, you have a problem. He also noted that Quebec made the mistake of not taking price into account at first and was very wrong. Getting into the target ratios, the action plan didn't back up the ratios. As you can see, the ratios of how many kids will attend daycare in any situation is all over the map, depending on other factors. National average is 19%. Port Moody is above average at 21%. Manitoba is 34%. Quebec is 58%. You have to state the other factors, and that's what I wasn't tied in. Quebec is considerably higher than all of the other provinces, as it has a price per day of $8.50. So my question is, what assumptions are behind the 33%, the 74%, and 49%? Where did those numbers come from? And once they explain how they came up with those estimates, then it can be peer reviewed. So the concept of unmet demand cannot justify a required doubling of current spaces. Intuitively, you can just think that if there's one daycare that is at or slightly below capacity, maybe has a few extra spaces, you open up a new daycare right next door, that second daycare isn't going to fill quickly. And that's just intuitive. But if you even then follow the statistics of new daycares starting up and watch how long they take to fill up, you'll know that increases of this magnitude simply cannot be supported by the concept of unmet demand. So I've got a completely separate video on unmet demand, but for right now, this simple query on a website, it's listed there, daycarebear.net, shows the facilities, the daycares in Port Moody and Coquitlam that have posted their vacant spaces on January 25th. Now, the red ones are facilities, daycare facilities, the blue ones are home daycares. And the only ones that appear here are vacancies that the daycares have chosen to list on this site. There's a lot more daycares that don't list on this site. I don't know what proportion of daycares do list on this site, so I can't extrapolate to tell you, to estimate the vacancies on that date, but you can see that there are a number of them. It also doesn't mean that there isn't a need in specific areas, that there's not a shortage because of new demand, people moving in, development, or another daycare closing, which is one of the huge ones that causes stress, is when a daycare closes. That's probably the biggest. This just shows that there isn't a general unmet demand, especially not of the magnitude that is assumed by the study. Question, do waiting lists reflect unmet demand? We already saw Gordon Cleveland saying, no, they don't. But this is kind of, they're not good predictors. But this is a little bit of explanation to help it make more sense. Port Moody Daycare currently has 96 on the waiting list. Average waiting time to get in is 1.2 years. So that you would think indicates a lot of unmet demand. But what the survey did not ask, a couple very important pieces of information. That daycare currently has 9 vacant spaces in the daycare. And the daycare operator, based on precedent and a few formulas, anticipates it taking 8 months to fill those 9 spaces. So how can that be? Waiting lists track children waiting for a given type of care starting on a given date. So for school age, families register their children when they're born, and the children aren't even eligible for 4 to 5 years. So that skews the waiting list on all the school age waiting lists. That same daycare actually routinely had 18 to 22 on the waiting list for any given school year, but they've never filled up. They've always had a couple spaces when the year actually started. And one factor in that is families registering on every single waiting list in the area so that other families don't know if they're going to get a spot because there's somebody in front of them. And so it looks like they're not going to, and at the end they slide in there. So that's a huge stressor for families. Waiting lists are not a measure of unmet demand. I have another video about why parents can't find daycare when there are spaces available. There's a whole bunch of different factors there, so I've separated that out just for right now, except that there's stress and there sometimes might be enough spaces. My concern about the Port Moody Action Plan implementation in short term, they're putting in 240 infant toddler, 450 preschooler, and 384 school age spaces. We already know from the last query that there's vacant spaces in the area, so there's no unmet demand at the current fee level. And as was identified in the action plan, cost is preventing families who aren't satisfied with their current daycare from changing. So they're not going to come into the market either, because as long as the fees are what they are, they're going to have to stay with their parents taking care of their kids. So there's no increased demand. As stated in the action plan, most operators aren't able to lower their fees and still cover the staffing and all the rent and all the other costs for special needs kids. So if these spaces identified in the short term of Port Moody action plan are put in without any corresponding fee reductions, there's going to be significant overcapacity in the area, unless there's an increase in the number of children living there. But the city is saying that there's going to be a decrease in the number of children living there. And in the event of overcapacity, many daycares have small margins and can't survive low registrations for long. We already saw that it was recognized by the provincial and federal governments when they rapidly implemented daycare subsidies to keep daycares open when COVID hit. If an overcapacity situation lasts for even a couple months, there's daycares that are going to be forced to shut down. So your spaces that are built using public funds that might cause overcapacity will be offset by spaces that will then close down. So the public investment is like 1,074 spaces is about $42 million. If you take the grant 39,000, that's in the threshold that they try and work under. If the spaces are rushed in before the fee decreases, it's a distinct possibility there will be no increase in demand, and the new spaces would be largely offset by spaces that close. Not only will people lose their businesses, but public dollars will be spent, and there will not be the desired increase in spaces. And then if and when the subsidies are put in place and we get down to the $10 a day daycare, there will again be a need for more spaces, but the money's already been spent. So thank you for watching. And if you're interested in these topics, please subscribe. Thank you.